Shon liked routine, Chris not so much. Chris could suggest a mountain climbing trip on a Wednesday and by Friday have Shon crammed into a car with a bewildered expression. "We're not even wearing matching hiking boots," Shon pointed out helpfully. "Details, details," Chris dismissed, already blasting 80s pop and steering them towards the majestic and completely unforgiving Mount Whatsit. Their friendship was like that, a study in contrasts, held together by duct tape and shared fondness for terrible puns. The mountain, however, cared nothing for puns, terrible or otherwise. It loomed, indifferent and large, a silent challenge to Chris's impulsive decision-making skills and Shon's rapidly dwindling patience. This was going to be interesting. To be... "Okay, so maybe I forgot the tent poles," Chris admitted, rummaging through a backpack that seemed to hold everything but essential camping equipment. Shon sighed, brandishing a compass like it was a magic wand that could banish incompetence. "You packed packing peanuts? Why are there packing peanuts? Moral support?" Chris offered sheepishly. Their map, older than both of them combined, depicted a charming village where, in reality, a landslide had occurred in 1992, leaving only a vaguely sheep-shaped boulder. "See?" Chris said, pointing to the boulder. "I told you we should trust the classics." Shon stared at him, then at the sheep-shaped rock. "This is going to be a long trip," he muttered. Navigation, they discovered, was not their forte. Chris blamed the map, it's hand-drawn, how quaint, while Shon blamed Chris's uncanny ability to walk in circles. At one point, they ended up back at their car. "Didn't we leave this here 3 hours ago?" Shon asked, his voice flat. Chris, ever the optimist, grinned. "See, we're getting the hang of this whole nature thing. It's like a loop trail, but with more complaining." They encountered a park ranger, a woman who looked like she'd rather wrestle a bear than deal with two grown men who couldn't tell north from a waffle. "You're supposed to be on the other side of the mountain," she said, pointing in a direction that seemed suspiciously like up. Chris developed a sudden fascination with foraging. "These berries look delicious," he announced, popping one into his mouth. Shon, armed with a guidebook he'd actually bothered to read, snatched it away. "Those are poisonous. You could have died." "Only if I wasn't already immortal from my sheer awesomeness," Chris retorted, undeterred. They had a near-miss encounter with a bear, which Chris insisted on serenading with his off-key rendition of Teddy Bear's Picnic. The bear, thankfully, seemed more frightened than hungry and lumbered away with a look that suggested it had heard better. The kindness of strangers who laugh at you. Lost, hungry, and with Chris sporting a rather fetching poison ivy rash, they stumbled upon a group of seasoned hikers. These weren't your average granola bar munching fleece-wearing hikers, though. These were the kind who climbed mountains before breakfast and probably used compasses to find their cereal in the morning. "You boys look lost," one said, chuckling at the sight of Chris's swollen face and Shon's rapidly fraying sanity. After much amusement at their expense, the experienced hikers took pity on them, providing directions, food that wasn't poisonous, and a healthy dose of ridicule that would fuel their therapy sessions for years to come. Summit fever, sort of. Reaching the summit was less of a triumphant climb and more of a desperate scramble. Chris, high on stale granola bars and the delusion that he was Bear Grylls, insisted on taking a shortcut that involved scaling a near-vertical rock face. Shon, meanwhile, clung to a shrub and considered the merits of a life of solitude in a cave, far away from impulsive best friends and questionable decisions. But they made it. Panting, sweating, and with Shon questioning his life choices, they stood on the peak, gazing out at a view that was, admittedly, pretty darn impressive. Downhill slide, literally. Going down, as it turned out, was not easier than going up, particularly when Chris decided that the fastest way down was to embrace the inner child and slide down a particularly steep and muddy slope. Shon, ever the voice of reason and also the one who wasn't currently coated in mud, opted for the slower, less dignity-compromising route. Chris's shortcut resulted in a mud-caked mess and a rather spectacular crash, landing into a conveniently placed and very startled family of squirrels. Never eat stew made by Chris. Their last night on the mountain was celebrated with a campfire, lukewarm canned beans, and Chris's attempt at a hearty mountain stew made with questionable mushrooms and a generous helping of optimism. It smells Unique, Shon said diplomatically, holding the bowl at arm's length. The first bite was an experience Shon would never forget, mostly because it involved a flavor combination that defied both nature and culinary logic. Let's just say fire wasn't the only thing Chris managed to create that night. Home sweet, unappealing home. Back in civilization, showered and with their stomachs no longer rebelling, Shon and Chris reflected on their adventure. "You know," Chris said, "we make a great team." Shon, massaging a pulled muscle, gave him a look. "You mean like a comedy duo? Because I think we nailed the accident-prone straight man and his chaotic best friend bit." And so they did what any sensible pair of friends who'd just survived a near-death experience by questionable food and questionable decisions would do. They started planning their next adventure. After all, what are best friends for if not to drag you out of your comfort zone and into hilarious, albeit slightly terrifying situations?